The office was alive with the usual sounds of ringing phones, hurried footsteps, and the quiet tapping of keyboards. It was a modern building with glass walls that reflected the sunlight, making the rooms feel brighter than they actually were. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the corridors, and a faint buzz of conversation moved like a river through the hallways. Everyone seemed busy, absorbed in their own work, focused on meetings, deadlines, or reports. Yet, amidst all the routine, there was one person who seemed to exist in a world of their own, quietly moving from room to room with cleaning supplies in hand, unnoticed by most. The janitor had been working there for years, but very few people truly knew much about them. They kept to themselves, never drawing attention, always polite but reserved. They moved with quiet efficiency, their presence more of a shadow than a figure. The employees often forgot they were even there, except when they needed a floor cleaned or a spill wiped up. There was a certain calmness about the janitor, a steadiness that contrasted with the hectic energy of the office. But beneath that calm exterior, there was something deeper, a talent hidden from the world, something that very few could have imagined. On that particular day, the office was not just an office. It was hosting a small gathering, an informal event meant to celebrate a recent business success. There were snacks arranged on tables, sparkling water in glasses, and a few employees who had taken time out of their work to dress up slightly more than usual. The CEO, a person known for their confident presence and occasional sharp wit, had called the meeting, not knowing exactly how it would unfold, but confident that their charm would fill the room. The CEO loved to test people, sometimes joking in ways that could surprise or even embarrass those around them. As the employees chatted, laughing and complimenting the arrangements, the CEO leaned against a polished desk, watching the room with a playful glint in their eyes. They liked to stir things up occasionally, to see reactions, to challenge the ordinary flow of life in the office. Then, as if on a sudden whim, the CEO raised their voice just enough for the room to quiet down, catching everyone's attention. "Who here can play Chopin?" they asked with a laugh, eyes scanning the group. "If anyone can play a piece of Chopin perfectly, I will marry them." There was a ripple of surprise, some laughter, and a few raised eyebrows. People looked at each other, unsure if the CEO was serious. Some shook their heads and chuckled, dismissing it as another one of the CEO's dramatic jokes. But then the CEO's gaze fell on the janitor. They were standing by the corner, holding a mop, looking down at the floor, quietly going about their task. The room grew slightly tense. Employees whispered to each other, some smirking, some skeptical. "Can the janitor even play the piano?" one whispered. Another shook their head, laughing softly. "This is going to be interesting," someone else muttered. The janitor paused for a moment, straightened up slightly, and looked toward the CEO. There was no visible surprise on their face, no nervousness. Instead, there was a calm, almost serene expression, as if they had been expecting this moment all along, or perhaps as if it did not matter whether anyone believed in them or not. The janitor's hands rested lightly at their sides, and their eyes met the CEO's directly, quietly acknowledging the challenge without a word. The CEO raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the calm response. It was rare for someone in that role to have such a quiet confidence, and the sudden shift in the room's energy was palpable. Employees who had been laughing now looked on with curiosity. Something about the janitor had changed the dynamic, and the playful teasing tone in the CEO's voice faltered just slightly. A few employees began to speculate quietly. "Do you think they actually know how to play?" one asked. "They always hum quietly while cleaning," another replied. "Maybe there's more to them than we thought." The janitor walked slowly toward the piano that had been placed in the corner of the room for a previous employee recital. The piano was not grand, just a simple upright model, its black surface slightly scuffed from years of use. But the janitor treated it with respect, running their hands lightly over the keys, checking the sound, as if greeting an old friend. The room held its breath. Even the CEO, who rarely showed hesitation, felt a slight thrill of anticipation. A hush fell over the office. Employees moved closer to see, some standing behind chairs, others leaning over desks. The janitor adjusted the stool, sat down, and placed their hands over the keys. Their posture was relaxed but precise, the kind of posture that comes from long familiarity with the instrument. Then, slowly, their fingers began to move, and a single note floated in the air. It was clear immediately that this was no ordinary touch, no casual playing. The note was pure, deliberate, and perfectly placed. A second note followed, then a third, and gradually a melody began to form. Employees exchanged glances, some widening their eyes in surprise, some whispering in disbelief. The CEO, who had expected a polite attempt at best, felt a jolt of genuine curiosity. The janitor's hands moved with a grace and confidence that told a story of years of private practice, of countless hours spent in quiet rooms, unnoticed by the world. The music flowed naturally, carrying with it emotion and depth, filling the space in a way that made the office feel suddenly transformed. The mundane walls, the fluorescent lights, the routine papers and files, all seemed to fade into the background as the sound captured everyone's attention. No one spoke. Even the employees who had been joking just moments ago found themselves captivated. The CEO leaned slightly forward, their usual smirk replaced by a look of amazement. The music was not just accurate in its notes. It was expressive, nuanced, almost as if it were telling the janitor's own story without words. As the first phrases of Chopin's piece filled the room, memories stirred in the minds of those listening. Some recalled the quiet humming they had sometimes heard while the janitor worked. Others remembered fleeting moments when they had noticed something unusual in the way the janitor carried themselves, an air of focus and dedication that had always seemed a little out of place for someone in a janitorial role. Suddenly, all of those small, overlooked details made sense. The music grew richer, more complex, and the janitor did not hesitate, did not falter. Each chord, each pause, each delicate touch of the keys revealed not just technical skill, but a deep understanding of the emotion behind the notes. Employees leaned forward, some with hands over their mouths in awe, others with eyes glistening, touched unexpectedly by the performance. For the CEO, it was a shock unlike any they had experienced before. They had been confident, playful, certain that this challenge would be met with nervous laughter or failure. Yet, here was a person who had never sought recognition, who had quietly carried on with their work for years, suddenly showing brilliance in a way that left the entire room speechless. The janitor's expression remained calm, almost indifferent to the attention, focused entirely on the music. It was as if they were playing for themselves, or perhaps for the joy of the music itself, not caring about the audience or the CEO's bold challenge. Yet, paradoxically, it was this very humility and focus that made the performance even more powerful. Time seemed to stretch. What had started as a light-hearted challenge had become a moment of revelation. People forgot their work, their stress, their office hierarchy. There was only the sound of the piano, the subtle rise and fall of emotion in the room, and the quiet, steady presence of the janitor who commanded attention without asking for it. When the last notes lingered and finally faded into silence, the effect was immediate. A wave of astonishment passed through the room. Some employees clapped softly, not wanting to break the spell too abruptly, while others simply sat in stunned silence, still processing what they had just witnessed. The CEO, however, was frozen for a moment, eyes wide, unable to conceal the shock and admiration that filled them. The janitor rose slowly from the stool, hands brushing lightly over the piano as if thanking it for its service. Then, without a word, they returned to their cleaning duties, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. The CEO, still leaning against the desk, finally spoke, their voice quieter than before but carrying a mixture of awe and respect. Who taught you to play like that?" the CEO asked, genuinely curious, genuinely impressed. The janitor simply smiled, a small, knowing smile, and shook their head. There was no boast, no explanation, only a sense that their talent was theirs alone, quietly nurtured and protected until the right moment. The employees around the room exchanged glances, realizing they had just witnessed something remarkable, something that would change the way they saw the janitor forever. They had thought of them as quiet, ordinary, perhaps even invisible. But now it was impossible to see them that way again. The janitor had revealed a hidden world of talent, discipline, and artistry, and in doing so, had left a mark not just on the office, but on everyone present. The playful challenge of the CEO had been met, and in a way that no one could have anticipated. It was a moment that would be remembered, retold, and reflected upon for years to come. And so, the janitor continued their work, quietly moving through the office as if nothing had changed, while inside, everyone else carried the weight of what they had just witnessed. The stage was set, not just for the reactions that would follow, but for a story that was only beginning, a story that would challenge perceptions, reveal hidden truths, and ultimately change lives in ways that no one could yet imagine. The office returned slowly to its usual rhythm, but something had changed. The laughter that once bubbled lightly in the corners of the room was replaced by a quiet curiosity. Employees went back to their desks, yet their eyes kept drifting toward the janitor, who moved silently along the corridors, a mop in hand, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. Some whispered to each other, still in awe, unable to shake the memory of the music that had filled the room. The CEO, meanwhile, remained at their desk, staring at the space where the janitor had just performed. Their mind was racing. They were not used to being surprised, especially not in their own office, where they controlled most everything and everyone. Yet, this simple janitor had done something that shook the CEO's usual confidence. The precision, the emotion, the technical skill. It was something they had rarely seen in their life. It had been more than playing the piano. It had been a revelation. Later that day, the CEO asked the janitor to step into their office. The janitor complied, walking in calmly, pushing the door open quietly and standing near the corner. There was no hesitation in their movements, no showiness. The CEO, still trying to process what had just happened, struggled to find the right words. I didn't expect that, the CEO finally said, leaning back in their chair. No one ever mentioned that you could play like that. Where did this come from? The janitor simply shook their head and smiled lightly. I've played for a long time, they said softly. I didn't think it mattered here. The CEO looked at them closely. There was a quiet honesty in their eyes, a humility that made the CEO realize this wasn't a performance meant for recognition or praise. This was someone who had practiced for themselves, for the music, not for applause or approval. There was something rare about that, something that the CEO recognized immediately, even though they had never felt it so strongly before. Employees outside the office had started gathering in small groups, talking in hushed tones. Some had tried to peek in, curious to see what was happening between the CEO and the janitor. Whispers filled the hallways. Did you see the way they played? Flawless. I never imagined they could do that. Who knew the janitor had this hidden talent? People were still processing the shock. Many had underestimated the janitor for years, seeing them only as someone who cleaned floors and tidied offices, never imagining that such skill could exist behind a calm, quiet demeanor. Over the next few days, the janitor's life began to shift in subtle ways. Employees treated them differently, more respectfully. Some offered small smiles or nods in passing, a sign that their perception had changed. Even casual greetings carried an undercurrent of admiration. The janitor, however, remained largely unaffected by the sudden attention. They continued their routine with the same steady diligence, quietly performing their work with care. Yet, in private moments, the janitor allowed themselves a quiet satisfaction. They knew the music they had shared had touched people in a way words could not. It was a different kind of recognition, one that did not need to be loud or showy. The janitor had spent years perfecting their craft, often practicing in empty rooms late at night, when no one was around. The office, for them, had always been a space to exist quietly, a place to earn a living without drawing notice. But now, for the first time, their talent had a witness. The CEO, meanwhile, could not stop thinking about what had happened. They were known for their assertiveness, for their sharp wit, and for rarely being caught off guard. Yet here they were, genuinely stunned by someone who had previously gone unnoticed. The CEO began asking questions, trying to understand how the janitor had acquired such skill. There was a sense of fascination, almost a desire to learn more about the person behind the music. In the cafeteria, Employees who had been present during the performance compared notes. One said, "I heard they used to take lessons when they were younger, but no one ever knew. It's amazing how someone can hide such talent for so long." Another added, "It's more than just playing the notes. There's emotion in it. You could feel the story in their hands." The janitor's skill became the topic of quiet admiration, a story that spread without fanfare, whispered in hallways, shared over coffee, and repeated among colleagues with wonder. The janitor's past slowly began to surface, though only in fragments. Some co-workers recalled that they had always hummed classical music softly while working. Others remembered seeing worn sheet music tucked into a locker long ago, a detail they had never thought much about at the time. These small hints, now seen in a new light, painted a picture of someone who had nurtured a deep, private talent, a talent that had remained hidden for years. Despite all this, the janitor remained humble. They never sought to perform for others, never demanded recognition, and never allowed the attention to change the way they worked. Their focus remained on the imagine. Music itself, on the craft, not the applause. This quiet strength made the CEO's admiration grow even more. They realized that here was someone who had not only exceptional skill but also extraordinary humility, a combination that was rare and remarkable. One afternoon, the CEO arranged for a small piano to be moved to a more prominent space in the office. They invited the janitor to play again, but this time it was not a challenge. It was an opportunity to share their music, not for approval, but for the simple beauty of it. The janitor, true to their nature, approached the piano cautiously, yet with the same quiet confidence as before. As the janitor began to play, employees gathered naturally, drawn by the sound. Some stopped working, others leaned on door frames, and a few even pulled chairs closer to the piano. There was no formal announcement, no pressure, only the gentle pull of the music itself. And as the notes filled the room, the office transformed. The mundane walls, the ordinary desks, the fluorescent lights, everything faded away, replaced by the living presence of the music. It was during these moments that the CEO began to see a different side of the janitor. Not only were they technically skilled, but they had a unique ability to touch people emotionally. Every chord, every pause, every delicate touch of the keys communicated something more than music. It communicated a sense of life, of feeling, of quiet strength. The CEO, usually focused on business, profit, and strategy, found themselves deeply moved, seeing the janitor in a new light. In the following weeks, the janitor's reputation quietly grew. Visitors to the office began asking to hear them play, not for spectacle, but simply because people wanted to experience the rare beauty of their music. The janitor continued to practice in the same quiet manner, their skill becoming more refined with each day, each piece played with care and emotion. Employees learned to pause, to listen, to appreciate the hidden talents that often go unnoticed in the ordinary rush of life. The CEO, increasingly intrigued, began to speak with the janitor more often. These conversations were never about work, never about tasks or schedules. They were about music, about life, about the journey that had led the janitor to where they were. Through these talks, the CEO learned not only about the music but also about the dedication, the sacrifices, and the quiet resilience that had shaped the janitor's life. Other employees began to notice a subtle change in the office culture. There was a newfound respect for quiet talent, for skill nurtured in private, for dedication that went unnoticed until the right moment. People started to pay more attention to each other, to look beyond the surface, and to consider the hidden strengths of those around them. The janitor's example had created a ripple, a shift in perception that made everyone more aware of the extraordinary possibilities hidden in ordinary places. Even in small interactions, the janitor's presence was now felt more strongly. A simple nod, a polite smile, a calm acknowledgement of a greeting carried more weight. Employees who had once ignored or underestimated them now paused, reflecting on the remarkable display of skill they had witnessed. The janitor's life had not changed in dramatic ways yet, but the perception of them had shifted entirely. They were no longer just a janitor. They were a person of hidden depth and extraordinary talent. And through it all, the janitor remained grounded, never allowing the attention to alter their routine or their humility. They continued to move quietly through the office, cleaning, organizing, and maintaining the space with the same steady diligence. Yet, in those quiet moments, there was a sense of satisfaction, a quiet acknowledgement that their talent had found an audience, that their dedication had finally been recognized, even if only in part. It was a slow transformation, subtle but profound. The office, the employees, and the CEO were all beginning to see the janitor not just as someone who worked quietly in the background, but as a person of remarkable skill and presence. The challenge, the joke, the playful remark by the CEO had unlocked something far greater than anyone could have imagined. And as the janitor continued their work, the seeds of a story were being planted. A story that would unfold gradually, revealing hidden talent, humility, and the extraordinary power of quiet dedication. Every day, every note played, every interaction carried the potential to change perceptions, to inspire others, and to show that greatness often exists in the most unexpected places. The janitor's journey had only just begun, but already it was clear that the office would never be the same. People would remember the moment when music, humility, and hidden talent collided, creating a memory that would linger far longer than the sound of a single note. And as for the janitor, they moved quietly through the corridors, carrying with them the knowledge that they had touched lives, changed perspectives, and begun a story that would unfold in ways no one could why. Days passed since the janitor's first performance, but the memory of that music lingered in the minds of everyone in the office. People went about their work, yet there was a quiet energy, an undercurrent of curiosity that changed the rhythm of the everyday routine. Even those who had not seen the performance firsthand heard whispers, caught fragments of conversation, and could not help but wonder if what they had heard was real. The CEO, in particular, found it impossible to focus on the usual tasks. Meetings, reports, emails. All seemed dull compared to the image of the janitor at the piano, fingers gliding over the keys with such grace and precision. The CEO had encountered countless talented people in their life, but there was something different about this. The talent had not been flaunted, it had been quietly nurtured, and that gave it an authenticity that the CEO could not ignore. They decided to see if the janitor could play again, not as a challenge, but as a way to understand the depth of the skill. When the CEO asked the janitor to sit at the piano once more, the request was met with the same calm demeanor that had marked all their actions. The janitor agreed, not showing any excitement or apprehension, simply moving toward the instrument with a natural ease. Employees who had gathered nearby could sense the quiet significance of the moment. This was not a performance meant for applause, but something more personal, yet the effect it had on everyone else was profound. As the janitor began to play, the office fell silent. Even the usual sounds of keyboards and phones seemed to fade away. The music started gently, a soft, flowing melody that drew people in. The janitor's hands moved effortlessly, fingers dancing over the keys with a rhythm that was both deliberate and fluid. Each note carried emotion, telling a story that no words could capture. It was clear that the janitor's connection to the music went far beyond technical skill. They understood its soul, its essence. Employees stopped in their tracks, some leaning against desks, others standing completely still. The CEO stood near the back of the room, leaning against a wall, watching closely. There was admiration in their eyes, but also a sense of wonder, of discovery. They had seen the talent once before, but now they were witnessing it in a new light. The music seemed to fill the room with life, and everyone present felt it. It was not just a melody, it was a story. The music spoke of quiet perseverance, of patience and dedication, of the countless hours spent practicing in solitude. Some employees felt a lump in their throat, surprised at how deeply they were affected by something as simple as a piano playing. The janitor, lost in the music, seemed unaware of the attention. They played not for recognition, not for approval, but for the love of the art itself. The CEO could not help but step closer, drawn in by the sound. There was something almost magical about watching the janitor's hands move, precise yet expressive, each note carefully chosen, each chord resonating with intention. The office, which had always been a place of efficiency and business, felt transformed. The walls seemed to fade, the hum of the fluorescent lights became background noise, and all that remained was the music. After a while, the piece ended, and the room held its breath. There was a moment of silence, as if no one could bear to break the spell that had been cast. Then, slowly, the CEO clapped, softly at first, then more confidently. Other employees joined in, some with cautious applause, some with open admiration. The janitor rose, bowed slightly to the piano, and returned to their duties with the same quiet grace as before. The effect on the CEO was immediate. They felt a desire to understand more, to know the person behind the music, to discover how someone so quiet and unassuming could hold such extraordinary skill. Over the next few days, they found themselves watching the janitor more closely, paying attention to small details that had always gone unnoticed. The way they moved, the way they focused on each task, the calm determination that seemed to define every action. It all hinted at a depth of character and talent that few could match. Curiosity began to grow among the employees as well. Some began to ask subtle questions, trying to learn more about the janitor's background. Others tried to catch glimpses of them practicing during breaks or after hours. There was a sense of fascination, a quiet respect, and an awareness that something remarkable existed quietly among them, something that had long been overlooked. One afternoon, the CEO decided to take a more direct approach. They called the janitor into their office once again, this time with a purpose beyond admiration. "I want to know more about you," the CEO said, their tone sincere. "You have a talent that is extraordinary, and I think it deserves to be shared. Not just here, but beyond these walls." The janitor listened quietly, hands folded, eyes calm. They did not seem surprised or flustered. "I've always played," they said softly, "but I never thought it mattered to anyone else." The CEO leaned back, considering the words. They realized that the janitor's humility was as striking as their talent. Here was someone who could have sought recognition long ago, who could have performed in front of crowds, yet chose to live quietly, practicing in private, sharing only when necessary. There was a rare integrity in that, a strength that went beyond the music. Over the following weeks, the CEO began to arrange small opportunities for the janitor to perform. Nothing formal, nothing for publicity, just chances for people to hear the music and feel its effect. Each time, the office would pause, employees drawn to the piano by the sound, stopping their work to listen. There was no showmanship, no demand for attention, only the quiet, profound skill of someone who had dedicated their life to their craft. It was during one of these informal performances that a visitor to the office took notice. A local music teacher who happened to be in the building for unrelated reasons, heard the piano from the corridor and paused to listen. They were immediately captivated, unable to believe the skill they were hearing. They approached quietly, standing near the back of the room, and listened as the janitor's fingers danced across the keys, creating a sound that was both precise and deeply emotional. After the music ended, the visitor approached the CEO. "Who is that?" they asked, their voice filled with genuine amazement. "I've never heard anyone play like that, and I've been teaching music for over 20 years. That person has incredible talent." The CEO smiled, a mix of pride and wonder in their expression. "They're our janitor," they said simply, watching the janitor return to their work with the same quiet dignity. No one expected it, but they have a gift that is impossible to ignore once you hear it. The music teacher shook their head in disbelief. "This is rare," they said. "Not just the skill but the feeling behind it. They understand the music in a way that is extraordinary. They need an audience, a chance to be heard. The world should know about this talent." The CEO considered the words carefully. They had already begun to realize the same thing. The janitor's talent was more than a personal joy. It was something that could inspire, move, and transform others. Yet, they also understood that the janitor's humility must be respected. Any opportunity offered would have to honor the person, not just the skill. In the days that followed, small changes began to take place. The janitor was given access to a better piano, one that allowed for more expression and control. Employees who had once ignored them now greeted them with a mix of respect and curiosity. The office culture began to shift subtly, as people became more aware of hidden talents and the extraordinary abilities that can exist quietly in ordinary places. The janitor, for their part, continued to focus on the music itself. They played not for recognition, not for applause, but because the music was a part of them, a language they understood and expressed in the only way they knew how. And yet, even as they remained humble, the impact of their talent on the people around them grew, creating a ripple effect that would continue to unfold in ways no one could have anticipated. The CEO, increasingly inspired, began to think about the future. They realized that the janitor's story was not just about music, but about the value of recognizing potential, about the power of humility, and about the way extraordinary talent can exist in the most unexpected places. They began to consider ways to support the janitor, to ensure that their gift could be shared safely, respectfully, and meaningfully. And so, the office continued, with its routines, meetings, and deadlines, but now with a new awareness. People listened more carefully, observed more thoughtfully, and appreciated the quiet moments that could hold so much significance. The janitor's presence, once nearly invisible, had become a source of inspiration, a reminder that greatness is often found in places we least expect. The janitor moved through the office with the same calm demeanor as always, cleaning, organizing, and quietly practicing when possible. Yet now, there was a sense of anticipation in the air, a feeling that something extraordinary was unfolding, slowly but surely. Every note played, every melody shared, was a step in a journey that would transform not only their life but also the lives of those around them. And as the music continued to fill the office, it became clear that the janitor's story was only beginning. Each day brought new opportunities, new discoveries, and a growing recognition that the quietest people often hold the most remarkable talents, waiting for the moment when the world is ready to listen. The office had begun to change almost imperceptibly at first. People moved more slowly through the hallways, pausing when they heard the faint sound of piano music coming from the corner. Even the most hurried employees would stop for a moment, listening, captivated by the delicate flow of notes. What had started as surprise had grown into fascination, and the janitor, quiet as ever, had become the center of attention without ever trying to be. The CEO, more intrigued than ever, had begun spending extra time observing. They would pass by the janitor during breaks, sometimes stopping to listen without saying a word. There was a deep curiosity building, a desire to understand the person behind the music, the life that had led to this extraordinary skill. It was not just the music that impressed them. It was the humility, the dedication, the quiet confidence that seemed to define every action. One afternoon, the CEO asked the janitor to play again, this time for a small gathering of employees and a few visitors from a neighboring company. The janitor hesitated for a moment, as they always did, not because of nerves but because they were careful about how their music was shared. Then, with a small nod, they approached the piano and sat down. The room fell silent almost immediately. The visitors had only heard rumors of the janitor's talent, and now they were about to witness it firsthand. The first notes drifted out, soft and delicate, catching everyone off guard with their beauty. The janitor played with a mastery that seemed effortless, each chord precise, each phrase flowing naturally into the next. There was no rush, no hurry, only the music itself, pure and unadorned. Employees watched in awe, but it was the visitors who were most visibly struck. Some had seen professional musicians perform countless times, but they had rarely encountered someone with such raw emotion and skill combined. The janitor was not performing for applause or recognition. They were playing from the heart, and it made the experience far more moving than any practiced performance could. The CEO stood nearby, arms crossed, unable to hide the mixture of pride and amazement. They realized that the janitor's music had a power that went beyond technique. It could change the atmosphere of a room, influence the mood of everyone present, and even touch emotions that people had long forgotten. There was a quiet authority in the way the janitor played, a sense that they were in control of their own world even as everyone else listened spellbound. After the piece ended, a stunned silence filled the room. Then slowly applause began. It started softly, almost tentatively, but soon grew louder as everyone joined in. The visitors looked at each other, clearly impressed, while the employees who had seen the first performances smiled quietly, knowing that the music had touched everyone in the same way it had touched them. The janitor rose from the piano, bowed slightly, and returned to their cleaning duties. There was no boastful acknowledgement, no attempt to draw attention to themselves. The CEO, however, remained standing, visibly moved. They realized that this was more than just talent. It was character, humility, and dedication all wrapped into one extraordinary person. Later that day, the CEO invited the janitor into their office for a private conversation. "I've been thinking," the CEO said, leaning back in their chair. "You have a gift that is rare, something that can inspire people. I want to make sure it's recognized in the right way, without forcing you into something you don't want." The janitor nodded, listening quietly. "I've always played for myself," they said softly. "I didn't think anyone else would need to hear it." The CEO smiled, realizing that this was exactly what made the janitor's talent so remarkable. They were not seeking attention or praise. They were dedicated to the music itself. "But people need to hear it," the CEO replied. "Your music has a way of touching people in ways that words cannot. It can inspire, comfort, and even change lives. You have to consider sharing it at least a little." The janitor thought for a moment. It was not an easy decision. They had spent years in quiet practice, content with their own world, wary of the attention and expectations of others. But they also understood the truth in the CEO's words. The music was bigger than themselves, capable of reaching people in ways they could not. Slowly they nodded. In the following days, small changes began. The janitor was given more time and space to practice. The office arranged for the piano to be moved into a larger area where employees and visitors could listen without crowding. The CEO even invited a few local musicians to observe, hoping to find someone who could help the janitor grow their skill further if they wished. Every performance was met with quiet awe. People would pause their work, drawn by the music, and sometimes tears would form in the eyes of those who listened. The janitor's playing had a way of reaching deep into the heart, stirring emotions that had been dormant. It was not flashy or dramatic, but every note carried meaning, every pause a story, and every chord an invitation to feel. The CEO found themselves increasingly involved, not as a manager but as a supporter, a witness to something extraordinary. They would sit quietly, listening for long periods, taking notes not about business but about how people reacted to the music, about how the atmosphere changed with each piece played. It became clear that the janitor's presence and skill were reshaping the culture of the office, creating an environment of respect, patience, and appreciation. Employees began to notice subtle differences in their own behavior. People were kinder, more attentive, more willing to help each other. There was a shared awareness that something special was happening, a recognition that talent and humility could coexist in ways that inspired everyone around them. The janitor had changed more than the soundscape of the office. They had changed the spirit of it. Visitors who had come for meetings or briefings were often drawn into listening. Some would linger in hallways, unable to leave until the music finished. Others would ask quietly if they could come back to hear more. Word began to spread outside the office, although nothing was done to advertise it. People were discovering the janitor's skill through reputation, through stories shared quietly, through the word-of-mouth magic that could not be bought. The janitor remained humble throughout it all. They never sought attention, never demanded recognition, and always returned to their duties after playing. Yet their presence had become essential to the office environment, a steady, inspiring force that reminded everyone of the power of quiet excellence. One day, a particularly large gathering was planned, including employees, visitors, and local musicians. The janitor was asked to play a more complex piece, one that required not only technical skill but emotional depth. They accepted, preparing carefully, focusing on each detail as they always did. When the time came, they approached the piano with the same calm demeanor, and the room fell silent in anticipation. As the first notes rang out, everyone could feel the depth of the performance. The janitor's playing was flawless, Yet more than that, it was alive with emotion. People felt the highs and lows of the music, the tension and release, the joy and sorrow woven together in a tapestry of sound. Even the CEO, who had seen the first performances, felt tears welling in their eyes. There was something almost sacred about the way the janitor connected with the piano, and through it with everyone in the room. The piece ended, and the applause was immediate and heartfelt. The janitor rose, nodded politely, and returned to their duties, unchanged in demeanor but leaving a profound impact on everyone present. The CEO approached afterward, placing a hand on their shoulder. "You are remarkable," they said quietly. "Not just for the skill but for who you are. People need to know your story." The janitor smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "I've never thought about being known," they replied. "I just want to play." But the CEO understood. Talent like this could not remain hidden forever. It deserved recognition, not for fame or wealth, but because it could inspire others, because it reminded people that greatness often exists in unexpected places. Over the following weeks, plans were made carefully, respecting the janitor's wishes and humility. Small opportunities to share their music outside the office were arranged, and local musicians and teachers were invited to provide guidance and support. Every step was deliberate, ensuring that the janitor remained comfortable while their extraordinary talent was gradually revealed to the world. Meanwhile, life in the office continued to change. Employees were more attentive, respectful, and patient. Visitors often remarked on the serene atmosphere, unaware that the source of it was the quiet janitor whose fingers danced across the piano keys. The music had created a culture of awareness, empathy, and appreciation, all through the power of quiet skill and dedication. The janitor continued to move through their days with the same steady focus. They cleaned, organized, and cared for the office, all while practicing and perfecting their craft. Yet there was a growing awareness among everyone that they were witnessing something rare, something that could not be replicated or forced. It was not just talent. It was integrity, humility, and a love for the art that touched everyone who heard it. And as the janitor played, as the music flowed through the office, it became clear that this was only the beginning. Their journey was unfolding slowly, deliberately, and with a quiet power that promised to change lives, perspectives, and the very meaning of what it meant to recognize talent and greatness. After months of quiet recognition and small performances, the janitor's life began to change in ways that were both subtle and profound. The office had grown used to the idea that their presence was extraordinary, that their music was more than just notes on a piano. Employees no longer saw them as just a person doing a job. They saw someone who carried a talent so rare that it inspired awe, humility, and admiration. Yet, through all of it, the janitor remained the same, calm, humble, and focused on the music itself. It started with invitations that were careful and respectful. The CEO arranged for the janitor to play at a few local events, small gatherings of musicians and music enthusiasts. These were not public performances in the traditional sense, but more intimate opportunities for the janitor to share their gift. Each time, the janitor approached the stage quietly, their presence unassuming, yet the moment they touched the keys, silence fell. The audience, even if small, was captivated immediately. The music spoke for itself. It carried the janitor's story without a word. Each note seemed to reflect years of quiet practice, patience, and love for the art. People listened not just to the technical skill but to the emotion behind it. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others sat rigid, transfixed, unable to tear their gaze away from the hands that moved so gracefully across the keys. Even seasoned musicians found themselves stunned, some whispering to each other, unable to believe the depth of feeling in the performance. Back at the office, the change in perception was complete. Employees now went out of their way to acknowledge the janitor, not just for the music, but for the person behind it. Respect had grown into genuine admiration. Colleagues would ask if the janitor needed help or simply offer a kind word, not out of obligation but from genuine appreciation. Even small gestures, a smile in passing, a quiet nod, a compliment on a new piece played, were met with warmth and subtle gratitude. The janitor, though still humble, had begun to realize that their skill could affect people in ways they had never imagined. One afternoon, the CEO called the janitor into their office once again, this time with a serious tone. "I've been thinking a lot about what you can do, not just here, but beyond this building," the CEO said. "You have a talent that should be seen and heard by more people. I want to help make that happen, but only if you are ready." The janitor paused, considering the offer. Their life had always been quiet, predictable, and safe. Public attention was a new and uncertain territory. But at the same time, they felt a quiet truth. Music was meant to be shared. It had always been personal, yes, but if it could touch more lives, perhaps it was time to let it reach further. Slowly, they nodded. "I will try," they said softly. The first larger opportunity came unexpectedly. A local music school, having heard word of the janitor's skill, requested a private recital. It was a small room, but filled with students, teachers, and local enthusiasts. The janitor approached the piano quietly, adjusting the stool, as always, and began to play. From the first note, it was clear that this was more than talent. It was presence, discipline, and emotion all combined. Students whispered in awe, teachers exchanged glances, and even casual attendees sat captivated. There was no showmanship, no dramatics, only music that carried the weight of years of practice, of quiet dedication. Some in the room wiped tears discreetly, moved by the unexpected beauty of what they were hearing. The janitor, focused entirely on the music, seemed unaware of the effect it had. Yet each note resonated far beyond the piano. Word began to spread. Invitations came for more recitals, workshops, and collaborative opportunities. Musicians from other cities expressed interest in meeting them, learning from them, or simply experiencing the music firsthand. Each invitation was carefully considered, and the janitor accepted only those that felt comfortable, maintaining their humility and focus. The CEO continued to support the janitor, acting as a guide and advocate. They arranged for meetings with music teachers who could help refine technique, plan schedules that balanced work and practice, and ensured that every opportunity respected the janitor's comfort and pace. The CEO had grown deeply impressed, not only by the skill itself but by the person's ability to remain grounded despite attention and praise. There was an integrity to their approach that was as rare as the talent itself. Back in the office, the janitor's presence became a source of inspiration. Employees no longer measured success solely by productivity or achievements. They began to see the value in patience, dedication, and the quiet pursuit of excellence. Some started picking up musical instruments themselves, encouraged by the janitor's example. Others approached their own work with more care, more attention to detail, understanding that greatness can emerge in unexpected ways. Then came the moment that changed everything. A regional music competition, known for discovering hidden talent, extended an invitation. It was an unusual step for someone who had never performed publicly at that level, but the CEO encouraged the janitor to consider it. After careful thought, the janitor agreed. It was not about winning. It was about sharing music with a wider audience, about letting people hear what had been nurtured quietly for so many years. On the day of the performance, the janitor arrived early. The hall was large, filled with an audience eager to see the newcomer whose reputation had already begun to spread. The janitor took a deep breath, remembering the quiet moments of practice, the countless hours of solitude, and the music that had always been their companion. Then, as they sat at the piano, the room fell silent. The first notes were soft, tentative, yet deliberate. As the piece progressed, the sound grew in confidence, clarity, and emotion. The audience was mesmerized. Every chord, every pause, every subtle touch seemed to tell a story. People could feel the weight of years of practice, the patience, and the love for music that had remained private for so long. There were gasps of admiration, quiet whispers of awe, and tears in the eyes of many. The janitor was not performing for them, yet the effect was undeniable. The CEO, sitting near the back, watched in quiet pride. They had known this talent existed, had supported it carefully, but seeing it resonate with so many people was something else entirely. The janitor had transformed from a quiet presence in the office to a figure whose music could move a room, inspire hope, and touch hearts. When the performance ended, the applause was thunderous. The janitor rose, bowed gently, and smiled, their humility unchanged despite the recognition. They returned to their corner quietly, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But in the audience and in the CEO's mind it had. After the event, teachers, musicians, and attendees approached the janitor, offering words of admiration, encouragement, and opportunities for collaboration. Each interaction was met with polite gratitude, the janitor's focus remaining on the music rather than the praise. Yet, through it all, there was a quiet transformation. Life had opened doors that had once seemed impossible. The CEO reflected on the journey with awe. What had begun as a playful challenge had become something far more significant. The janitor had reminded everyone that talent can exist in the most unexpected places, that humility and dedication are as powerful as skill, and that sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest impact. The office itself had changed, the employees inspired by the example, the culture richer and more aware. The janitor, though now recognized far beyond the office, continued to approach life with the same calm focus. They played for the love of music, for the joy it brought to others, and for the fulfillment it gave them personally. Recognition, applause, and opportunities came and went, but the janitor's essence remained the same. They were, above all, a person who had discovered a way to express themselves fully, quietly, and meaningfully. In the end, the janitor's story became one of transformation, not only for themselves but for everyone around them. The CEO, the employees, and even the wider community learned that greatness often exists quietly, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. Talent, humility, and dedication could inspire change far beyond the individual, shaping culture, perceptions, and lives. The janitor continued to move through the office each day, cleaning, organizing, and caring for the space, their presence calm and steady. Yet the world now knew a truth that had always been there, that extraordinary skill can exist in the most ordinary places, and that sharing it, even gently, can change everything. And so, the janitor's music continued to fill the air, touching lives, inspiring hearts, and reminding everyone that greatness is not always loud or visible. Sometimes it is quiet, patient, and hidden, waiting for the moment when it can shine. And when it does, it leaves an impact that no one forgets. The janitor had played their part, and the world had listened, transformed in ways both subtle and profound.